InsightAI, powered by InsightJam.
Back again with another episode of InsightAI with our solutions review expert, Doug Shannon. Doug, thanks for being with us again.
Yeah, I appreciate being here, Doug. And it's always fantastic.
Well, there's just so much going on. It's unbelievable. And there's any number of ways we can take this direction. I'm curious what you, what's top of mind with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always researching and trying to stay on top of it. And really what actually caught my eye recently was, and sometimes I watch patents and kind of where things are going, because I like to see, it's a good idea. It's a good way to really see where companies are kind of like leveraging their time or what have you. And I found that Sony, like Sony Entertainment, like the Sony side of this, that the company was actually putting out patents around robots and like actual physical robots. And these robots are going to help potentially like elderly care or potentially get into the space of everybody else doing robots. And so it's entertaining and seeing like, what does that mean? How are they leveraging this? And really it looks like it is around people care. And so Sony is very known to be like a Japanese-based company, and so in that, and then that they have an aging populace like most first world countries that we see. You know, I was looking at this from a technological side, and I'm like, you know, what does this mean to me, and where do I see this going? And I think the insights that I can provide here are, I think people may get it wrong, and what I mean by get it wrong is that we think automatically, you know, in some cases, some of us think automatically like these robots are going to come out and they're going to start doing these different tasks. They're going to be like a Roomba rolling around and doing things. But really, I think what we should be looking at is how they learn. And especially when we look at Tesla bots or we look at some of these other bots, you know, they learn by doing. And so how best do we do that? Do we have like puppets and we have like little hand puppets and we're messing with stuff? Maybe not. Maybe it's just video recording. So what if we did this scenario, right? What if we jumps outside the box a little bit and say, if we need video recordings of how to handle patients, how to handle humans. So if you were a robot, how would you handle a human? How would you help them move in their bed? How would you feed them? How would you take care of them? How would you lift them up to go on walks or walk with them? All of that stuff is very hard to teach robotically. But if you were to be, say you're a nurse and you already do this job, what if you were to be in VR, like virtual reality, put on your goggles, be inside, like telecommute into that robot, all of that data is being recorded. So the same services or art of service or what you're producing as a product to protect or help these people, that would be recorded. So then is that a better way? Could you actually support more people? I think so, right? So say if you take the account of, you know, say Doug, I'm a nurse. I'm not a nurse, but like if I was and I was doing this and maybe I just work a 4-hour shift or an 8-hour shift, but then, I can work another shift or I can sub in for somebody, or I could be in the United States and then work with somebody in the Philippines to actually do the same function. Why can't I do that then? If I just go into my VR and the internet is there and then the Wi-Fi capabilities is actually, if the infrastructure is available, why not? And then after we record tens of thousands of data, I think we have robots that actually can do some of this stuff.
This is near and dear to me, given that
You're not that old yet, Doug. I'm just saying.
No, but I have a very elderly father who basically lost his balance and kept falling and has required 24/7 care. And when you get into that system, you realize how many people are in that system, and you realize how massive that problem is. And to your point, in a society that, like Japan, and there are going to be a lot of them, where the elderly population is outstripping the ability for a younger population because of, population growth issues, you're going to need to augment. And it's interesting. I just quickly Googled the idea of hiring workers to help with this training. And it turns out, in an article just posted today in Fortune magazine, that Tesla is hiring workers for $48 an hour to wear motion capture suits to train the Optimus robots. So
there you go.
if you think about it, that's quite brilliant. And it's fascinating. I'm not sure if I guess, I'm not sure Tesla is heading in the healthcare direction. They probably are heading in more of a manufacturing direction, just because they have the ability not only to potentially capture it through hiring people, but also they just have massive amounts of factories, as does Sony, actually, where they can actually implement and trial on the shop floor how robots might be able to be employed within a manufacturing environment, which I think is, again, that in terms of upside, that's going to be a massive one.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. I think there's a number of ways you can go. I mean, and to your point, I think I've seen some examples where folks are using VR remotely around the world and operating a robot through effectively remote control in real time. But the idea of also just understanding the human propulsion, biomechanics,
or intricacies, right? Like
intricacies, correct.
We're not robots, right? Like we kind of move and shake, and our tummies grumble when we're hungry, and it's the way things work. So.
Well, at $48 an hour, I might sit inside a motion capture suit for a little while.
Well, it's interesting that they're actually explaining that, right? So same thing with like Tesla cars, they don't use LiDAR, right? So every other car company, for the most part that I know of, uses LiDAR, and it's taking information from the outside and giving distance and whatnot. Theirs does not. And mainly, from what I've read, is that it's because of all of the recordings of hours and hours and hours that they've recorded that and you have rules, right? There's rules of the road. There's like signposts. There's these things they can read. If you're at a stoplight and you're stopped and it turns green, it kind of chimes and says, oh, hey, light's green, you can go now. And so there's that aspect. But how do you do that in our world, in the human world? And you almost need humans taking that motion capture to build that layer of what's the rules, what's outside of the bounds, and what's in bounds.
Well, and if anybody's ever played Madden, they put the suits with the balls on every player and get this incredible video game recreation of professional athletes, and it makes all the sense in the world to be able to do that and create essentially a third dimensional aspect to robotic behavior. And truth of the matter is that when you see the care that can be provided for a certain amount of money, reducing that cost down is going to be a driver for these large healthcare providers. And so being able to employ robots at a potentially at a more reliable and cheaper rate.
Well, I mean, again, like if you have a nurse that's and eventually and they pay them at a lower rate, but you can actually handle more, or maybe incoming nurses that are just coming out of college and whatnot, like you now have this is where AI creates a new job, right? A new job class has been created. Virtual robotic suit, motion suit capture assistant that is being used to actually gather these motion captures to drive the nuance of the company, or drive the nuance of like what's being done in the world around us, so that we can actually have robots eventually take that over.
Well, I think it's fascinating as well that the idea that that the game is on for robots. I think you mentioned self-driving cars. That has been, it seems, because it's so impacting on public safety, that has been a long, arduous road to get to. And we're still not there yet. And so it just strikes me that robots are the hardest thing to solve. And so what it appears anyway, from my perspective on AI, is that we're solving the digital tasks, and going to basically focus in on what the information worker can do in front of a screen in a virtual replication of their function versus this physical three-dimensional robotic replication, which is obviously going to naturally require way more expensive hardware, and also it's just harder. Simple as that. It's just harder. The robots that we've all been admiring still seem like they can barely get around.
Yeah, I think in the business space, even in like the startup space, everybody knows the term hardware is hard, right? It takes a lot of capital, it takes a lot of effort, It takes a massive amount of team and different understandings and backgrounds just to drive it. And so if you're a startup, you're like, we're going to build hardware. I mean, look at the AI pin. AI pin looked amazing, sounded amazing. You have a pin on your shirt and you just like talk to it and you say, hey, I want to do this, or what do you see in the world, or where am I going? And read my emails back to me. And it fell on its face. It didn't work very well. There were some things that they weren't able to rework or clean out that, they caused issues, and most people have returned those. And sadly, that hardware is hard.
Yeah. And again, I think, when you have, somebody like a Sony that is in the manufacturing space among a bunch of other things like entertainment, or somebody like a Tesla who is not only in the manufacturing space, but they're in the AI space very, very aggressively. And you can combine the two, right? So I think if you're kind of a classic old school manufacturer, or even a new school manufacturer, which is using some shop robots and kind of stationary robots, you still are a long way from the idea of robots moving around and so I think it's going to require companies like Tesla, like Sony, maybe Amazon as well, that have the facilities, the large facilities where lots of trials can be made in a controlled setting, where you'll get the advancements rather than more kind of traditional third-party manufacturers trying to sell to manufacturers who don't have any. I think that's a ways off.
Well, it's kind of a pivot, right? I mean, if you're an entertainment company, or you're a company that, was driving into different genres of media, and then you may be pulling back, you're saying, well, what's next? In this patent, they have like a drawing, and it's very almost like Rosie the Robot-ish meets like a Dalek from like Doctor Who, because it has like a very strong base. It's not bipedal like we are. It's not what Tesla's building. Right. Some of these other ones where it's like walking around. It's very stationary. It's actually very probably heavy, because I almost think, they didn't draw this, but if I was them and I'm thinking about elderly care, I'm like, why can't you help the patient or the customer, or, our, golden yeared folks, like help them sit on the robot? Like, hey, come here, sit in my lap. I'm the nice, like Rosie the Robot. I'm going to take you out, and I'm your companion, and I'm going to walk you down. I can, and then I can help you back in the bed, but it's all like right there. It's very stationary, it's very secure, and it has video surveillance. And you could even maybe as like a child of this parent, you can actually like tap in, like, oh, how are they doing today? And it can give you like a video feed, and hopefully they remember your face because of all the Alzheimer's and stuff that even I've had to deal with in families and stuff like that. So there's different aspects that definitely help like tailor that information, or maybe even just giving like hey, here's what we did today kind of thing. So
well, and I think your point around how somebody like a Sony, or there's going to be so many companies that are going to have to reimagine their growth opportunities when you can begin to see, and I think you probably saw it, I know some of it is absolutely mind-boggling. It's basically Sora-like video creation, but it's is it Laura or and
there's like there's two that just came out.
So the image creation, the singular image creation is stunningly accurate, and then there's an overlay of turning that image into effectively a moving video. Three-dimension of it.
Yeah, there's like Runway is a good one that people have used a lot, and there is another one. I forget the name, but even Grok 2 just came out. So Grok's
Grok's
so Tesla again, right?
Different matter, because that thing's absolutely wild. It
is the Wild West.
Much to Elon's credit and potential, detriment.
We're gonna throw this on.
He allows everything, and now I did see in going through the headlines today.
Yeah,
at least 3 or 4 different headlines where it was,
stuff you probably shouldn't see with AI. Different political figures, right?
And it's all being done through Grok and the political aspects. I think in truth, when you see them, and I've seen a few of them, kicking around, because they're just hilarious, and you can't not
everywhere.
See them. They're not exactly believable, if you will. It's almost like a cartoon or
It's like
parody.
It's still satire, right? And it's
satire. There you
it
go.
has a glow to it. And, it is. But I've seen some that are really hard, and actually that goes into the conversation of just some of the images that are out there. People that know about AI and this and image generation, they're already saying, "Oh, this was faked and that was faked," and this and some of it, come to find out, wasn't really fake.
Oh,
and
yeah, no, that's right. So the implications. So that's going to be a fascinating thing as well. Human behavior being, cognitive dissonance being what it is. You'll be able to kind of dismiss reality as, that was just never real in the first place. And you're going to be able, some people are going to be able to kind of just placate themselves with that story of, that wasn't real.
Yeah. And where that goes and where that stops and where that pendulum swings, like,
I'm telling you what. I have this whole thing about how our limbic system can't delineate anymore between what is real and what isn't real because of hundreds of thousands of years of believing this is real. Me and you talking is real, and we won't be able to. Our primitive brain won't be able to handle what's coming. It will just not know what's real and what isn't, and it will just convince us that it is real.
Right. Well, I mean, a call back to history is Plato's Republic, the story of the cave, right? And so in the story of the cave, everyone should know that. I hope if you don't, just go read it. It's amazing. It's literally, you have some prisoners, you throw them in a cave, and then what happens is you have this wall behind the prisoners, and then you have this fire that has light, and it projects out, and you have like little stick figures. You could tell a little story, and they believe everything that they see is real. And so when you let them out of the cave, you find out they actually want to go back into the cave because they may want to go back to the reality that they thought was real. And that's a real issue that we may come to see.
I think it's going to be fascinating, and I think it's going to happen so quickly, and it's going to be so.
It's going to be a blink of an eye, and
it's going to be pristine. The presentation layer is going to be flawless. It's not going to be Will Smith eating spaghetti. It's going to be.
That's a good one, though.
Yeah, no, it's going to be. The fingers are all going to work. It's all the texture is going to be in the hair movement. I mean, when you just see what animation has developed into in just the past 20 years, and special effects and so forth, you'll be able to spool that out in real time with massive processing power and proper generative AI, where a conversation will basically spool out in a call and response that you won't be able to, the lip sync will be spot on. You won't be able to tell the difference. You just will not. And we will be, it's going to be a mess, an absolute mess.
It is. And like authenticity is going to be highly sought after, but I don't think it's going to come fast enough. And we're already seeing that, just like we're discussing, like people are already being fooled by either someone saying something is fake or by just going forward and saying, and just the media, the way it is, like, it's just really hard doing. So any kind of authenticity is, people are going to be looking for that. And it's the same reason why, if you were to buy an AI 3D printed table in the future, it'll be super cheap. But then having a table that is made by hand from a human, that is going to 10x. And that one table that took that guy 40 hours to build, that's going to be worth some money. And so that's the way that things are changing, and it's just very interesting.
Yeah, we could go round and round on this because it just opens up so many questions. But there are other topics that we need to get to, and so why don't we take a break? And when we get back, we'll get into something that I know you've shown some folks and talked about, and it's something that I've been fascinated about as well, and that's really getting down into this, what would you call it? Not agentic? What would you call it?
Yeah, so it's the other side of it, not agentic, it's multi-agent frameworks.
Multi-agent frameworks, excellent. Yeah. All right, we'll take a break and we'll get back to that.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today.
All right, Doug, I know you've brought a little show and tell for us today, a bit of a presentation that you've been sharing. I know you shared it at a conference in Prague. I think you have another conference you're bringing it to, which I think is timely because right now, top of mind for everyone, and I just was reading a post on CIO.com, which said effectively that 74% of IT professionals see AI making their skills obsolete. And what that really speaks to, I think, is a concern, and I think a well-founded concern, that maybe some of this AI stuff might actually be a little too powerful. And I think what you've got here in this multi-agent framework that you want to share is a bit of a different story than that.
It is, right? So yeah, we could go into this but on that topic, yes, I mean, we've talked about some of this before, but it's definitely apparent that the foundational models that are out now, these large language models, the very large ones, are looking to compute around humans versus with humans. And so being a enterprise practitioner of enterprise automation, intelligent automation, and using Gen AI to help drive that into what many of us in the industry are calling Gen 3 of intelligent automation, where Gen AI and AI is actually enabling the future of where this is going and building, again, to like the multi-agent framework that I'm driving towards versus an agentic one. But we'll dive into it and talk about it. But the multi-agent framework also dials it in to say it's building like the autonomous enterprise, and that's kind of why I have it. How to navigate that. The one way to look at it is like there's two worlds to look at. And you have your traditional companies that we see and we've been used to, and we've probably all worked at one time or another. And in that traditional company, you had something that would happen. Somebody would do a podcast like this one between, and AI Insights, right? And then it goes viral, and then everybody inside the company doesn't realize because it went off when it got released on a Friday, and then over the weekend it went viral, and then everybody comes back on Monday and they're like, wait, what's going on? This thing went crazy. How do we deal with this? Like, where do we go next? And what does it mean? And how do we handle the customers around that? And so what happens is you have a bunch of frustrated customers, stressed out employees because they don't know where to go, how to support it. And that's kind of what we've seen in the past. I mean, I know I've had jobs like this, and usually the joke around that is like, we kind of call that dumpster fire because everybody's running around crazy. Like, how do we do this? What needs to happen? We're losing customers and people are frustrated, or we're getting phone calls and our star rating goes down on Yelp and whatnot. So that's traditional tech. Like, that's what we've been used to, but we need to move away from that. And the idea that AI and those of us that are practitioners in automation are looking for is like, okay, what does that look like in the future? How do we orchestrate and use things to build the autonomous enterprise? And when you're building that, what kind of similarities are going to be running? How do you use autonomous agents or AI agents and drive that demand and really, really act as that intelligent assistant that you're going to be utilizing every day? Because again, the future isn't like replacing humans. The future is, how do we work with them? How do we use that tribal knowledge? How do we use that understanding of how things work? Because humans are the best cognitive thing that there is to handle nuance and to handle things that nobody's seen before, even AI, right? We created AI, right? So essentially, like, how are we driving that? But in the context of Future Forward Inc., driving that same instance of where you had a podcast, it went on a Friday, it went crazy and viral, and everybody was like, what is this thing? Then, well, if you have all your co-pilots and things driving that and giving that information, so come Monday morning, your teams have the information that they have. It's very collaborative. It says, hey, this happened. I hope you're aware of this. You had all these emails come in. There's a lot of attention on this. Here's some streamlined processes that you can actually utilize and really drive this forward. And so that's the future.
Well, and I think everybody at the enterprise level these days is looking for a strategy that shows forward motion toward implementing an AI strategy, because in the end, you just can't sit on your hands. But I think there's also a need to do it in a way that is mindful of of an impact on a workforce that brings value, an intrinsic value, in its humanity.
Yeah, I mean that, and not just a marketing organization, and not just a finance organization. How do we enable everyone, right? Inside of an enterprise, inside of an organization. That's kind of where the multi-agent framework rolls in. And so when we talk about these next kind of steps here, and when we talk about the autonomous enterprise as a whole, and we look at the different agents that are coming in, what you get is really you're defining two terms, and that's ontology and taxonomy. And the reason why we're defining these two terms is just I want everybody to kind of think of every presentation you've seen from any vendor or any solution, and they say there's this giant box of data. And in that giant box of data, you have two things that come out. You have unstructured and structured. And then they say magic just happens, just magic happens, everything past that. And you're like, wait, hold on. Everything past that is structured happens, yes. But what happened to unstructured? They don't talk about that. So it is the largest like elephant in the room that many of us have been trying to define and how to do that. And really, ontology and taxonomy, right? So let's define it. So first, the multi-agent framework, multiple agents working together, driving to a goal. This is not just task automation or task agents or process agents that you have with agentic. Agentic is like throw a bunch of tasks out there, get it all done, very swarm, very like, let's do 10,000 things. Yeah, you get them done, but did they work together? In some cases they could, but in a whole, are they defining the issue? No, I don't think so. At least that's my personal opinion. I think that you're just getting the job done, but getting the job done is great. But what if you could actually define the issue? And defining the issue is where you get ontology and the taxonomy. But ontology right now is how do you define and build relationships between your data? How do you know what, where, and why of your data is? So if Anna here in the picture is over here and she drives a Toyota car and she uses a green umbrella when it rains because that's the one she owns, and she works at said company and this is the team and the organization she works in, you now have an understanding of who that person is. And that agent, that co-pilot agent, is going to start having an understanding of what she does, why she does it, how she does it. So there's cool stuff with that. We're going to dive into it more. And the taxonomy side of this is understanding the hierarchies. Where does the data live? How is it organized inside the organization? So when you talk about electronics or computers or laptops or servers or IoT devices, where do they live? What kind of constraints are around them? And how does the ontology of that user relate to that taxonomy? So now you're kind of marrying the two. So when you're defining things, you need the what, where, and why, and you need to understand the hierarchical of where it attaches, because then that gives you that semblance in the middle. So copilots in general, we've heard about copilots. They came out from Microsoft as the most commonly known. And copilots are great because they're built as a primary interface for the end user. They kind of help you in your day-to-day, answer questions that you may have, and they help workflow and streamline things that you're dealing with. The big thing here is that they're not just going to stay where they are. They're not just going to do that, because that is very limited. It's, it could be said not to be worth it right now in so many contexts, depending on how many people and how many users and how many employees you have. But where it's going, the evolution of copilots, where AI is embedded more into a copilot, not just because of LLM capabilities, but AI in regards to like it's evolving. And the reason why it's evolving is because it's going to take on discovery. And what discovery is discovery of process discovery. It's discovery of understanding these processes again. So instead of having an outside program that is doing task mining or process mining on your enterprise's data, why doesn't the co-pilot that works with you every day start to understand your tasks, starts to understand your processes? And then it starts to understand, oh, this is what discovery means. This is the process as a whole that Doug does or I do in regards to like how this works every day. And so when you have that understanding, you then just start to get that predictive ontology. Well, what does Doug do? How does Doug do it? And what are the words that Doug uses? Does he say money, dinar, bucks, dinero? All of those things apply, right? I don't know what you say, Doug, but in general, like it's probably bucks. So outside of the predictive ontology of understanding that user, understanding the nuance, you're also then doing perspective analytics. So in that, it's really starting again to understand the what, where, and how of what you do, and then driving that forward. So when you say, hey, I did this monthly report last month, and there is a commonality here, and I'm doing it again, but my data is missing. Where did it go? It can be like, oh, hey, that data is missing. Where did that go? And it can kick off a process to go work with another agent to find that out. Now, we'll talk about that when we get to the next agent. But in general, cognitive tagging is something that I put in there. You can also call it data filtering or data categorization. So this is the beginning of that. So filtering and data categorization is hard because, and this is why, again, like unstructured data is hard, because you don't know what to call it. It's unstructured because you don't know what it is. But if you have users and employees, you're utilizing data every day, and you're like, yep, that thing's IT data, that's HR data, this is this nebulous data, you're still going to have a way better idea of what to call that, and it starts to put all that together. The next way that this goes, so again, like if you had an issue and you were going to kick something off and you're like, hey, where does this go? Or I can't find this data point, or where'd my data go? You would kick off something to like the AI agent or like the middle agent, because it's kind of like the jack of all trades. And essentially what it's doing, its job, its main focus is taking the information from the co-pilots and saying, okay, what is this? What is the data mapping? Where does this data go? How does it do it? What's it at rest? What's it in motion? And when you're talking about data movement, well, you're talking about RBAC, right? So you're talking about role-based access controls. Who moved the data? Like who moved the cheese, right? Where did it go? Who had access to that? What was the role of that person? And what did they touch? And so all that is being defined, which then gives us, again, perspective analysis, like what, where, and why of what's going on. So we can actually see what actions are being taken. And then you get that collaboration and automation viewpoint. So again, like back when we were doing like talking about co-pilots, you're like, hey, we did this monthly report, we were missing some data. Hey, AI agent, can you go find this data for us? And it knows, oh, hey, well, last time it was here, but knowing where other users actually use that same data, oh, somebody moved it. Let's actually get you tied into there. And it would ask you a question. This is where Gen 3 intelligent automation comes in. It asks a question. It says, hey, do you want to connect to this data source that you have access to? Or, hey, you don't have access, come to find out. You may want to go get access. Here's a trouble ticket that you can open. And you're like, wow, that's amazing. It's helping you throughout your day. It's helping you through those hurdles that you may come across. So task management, it's able to spawn different things, like spawn tasks for you. This is where it's more agentic, right? It has the ability to task things out. It has the ability to create processes that it knows, but it knows that it has access to. And this is where automation comes back into it. It's not just AI. This is automation embedded with AI that knows how to drive it, because you have the auto controls. It's not going to do something like send out a task or do a process without the access to do so. And if it does, it's because you already told it to, and it's already being controlled by the automation, like monitor and control side. So autonomous operations, not everything in the autonomous enterprise is autonomous, and even in the multi-agent framework where it supports autonomous operations, because it's using automation AI together, because of, again, audits and how that is all controlled in the back end. And you can say, this runs monthly, this is okay to do, this is not okay to do. So then what you get is when you have every user, every employee in your organization or enterprise utilizing these co-pilots, you get a living ontology, because all that data is being filtered up into this layer of this AI agent. And it goes, oh, I'm starting to understand all the nuances. And then it's going to pass it to the next agent. And then that next agent is actually going to start building out some of the taxonomy stuff we'll talk to.
Yeah, Doug, let me stop you there just to kind of get your perspective on, so this is clearly an interesting strategic approach that I think most organizations could get behind. I think I'm always curious about who's driving the bus here. Is this the traditional CIO data team that is obviously they're going to have to be involved at some point, because they're the ones that are going to be able to need to tie all of that feed together in terms of where the data is, what data is being mapped and how these things are being brought together. But where do you see the organization beginning to implement this?
Yeah, so I mean, everyone has to be in agreement. So from your CIO to your CTO to your data security folks, and some people would say this is where like the CAIO lives, like the chief AI officer. I
have one of those yet?
Yeah, well, we do. There are
definitely
will.
Out there. Will they be real? Will they be a human?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So, my stance on that is I believe that it shouldn't be one person. The technology is so new that I believe that if you're going to have a chief AI officer, you should have a way of fractionally bringing those on, and you should have multiple ones within like an organization that kind of support each other in a way that you get the best of both worlds, so that you can actually make the best decisions or best business decisions, because it's still very new, very nuanced, and you have to have different viewpoints. You can't just have the classic, I'm a C-suite person, I'm going to come in and we're going to do it my vision, my way, with these constraints. That doesn't really fly anymore. That's not fast learning. That's not moving with the speed of now. That's classic.
I mean, this is a fairly, I mean, I see the word architecture in the definition here. This is a bigger strategic initiative for an organization, and it strikes me that it does have to be across multiple responsibilities, lines of business, roles.
But to your question, like who drives this, right? I believe it's traditionally in automation, especially enterprise automation, there was a center, like a COE, a center of enablement, a center of excellence. I believe that we kind of are evolving that again with the Gen 3 intelligent automation side of this. We're going to be using like a center of, AI hub or AI ops or something like that, because you want an organization that is supporting the end users and then knowing the what, where, and why, and kind of what that looks like, because you have to enable them. And so when you have AI coming in to this Gen 3, and the biggest thing about Gen 3 intelligent automation is English as code. And so when you're able to have end users and employees type out something that they want to do, and they get an automation or a kind of like a flow of what that looks like, and then they can say yes or no and test it and drive that forward, they're still going to need support of some kind to say, I want to do this. How do I do that? Or I got this far.
Yeah, the English as code idea is kind of a new one, where you're layering in these massive multi-token context windows against basically the ability to overlay a number of other. It's a multi-step process, but in the end, and that I think that is kind of an agentic approach, where you're going to end up with this ability to produce code in a way that is completely different than we've done it in the past, to the point where, I mean, there may be some impact against software engineers and the like.
A little bit.
There needs to be, you really need to begin to weigh in here, because those tools are, if they're not, if you're not building them right now, they're being built for you, and they will be here next year through some sort of sales cycle.
Yeah, so this thing about code gets more simple or more simplified. I mean, even having Scratch and having young children like building code, like the very simple things are the things that really programmers don't really want to do. And this is why sometimes you have like that, oh, these programmers have attitude. I think there was a quoting kind of like the ex-CEO of Google was just talking at an event recently, and he was just saying the same thing, like, hey, once we get English as code, we don't really need programmers anymore, but you still do. But then he kind of made a joke like, well, you don't need the ones that are kind of like hard to work with.
He was saying that that coders tend not to do what you want them to do. They kind of give you a number of reasons why that can't happen, and this kind of overpowers that. And I think he was being a little cheeky there, but to that point, that's not going to stop that evolution. That's going to continue, and rightfully so. I mean, I think if we can all become coders effectively, or get what we want out of the thoughts that we have in an output, I don't think we're going to mind that at all. I think the idea that product has to be sent off to be developed by some collection of coders or some third party somewhere in some other part of the world, that I think that's probably going to become old thinking.
Yeah, I mean, definitely like AI and Gen AI is becoming a massive leveler on all of us. Like it holds a mirror up to humanity. It drives, us and everyone else around us to start thinking differently. And there are concerns and there are other concerns. Like my main goal as being a practitioner in this space is taking a very human first approach and how to involve the human at all levels of this. And so that's my goal with this. And I think that it talks to it very well. But yeah, we could dive back into it so we can get to the full understanding of what the autonomous enterprise could look like and how a lot of this is actually already being built by other companies out there. And so that's pretty exciting to hear about too. So if we dive into the next one, so the next one is, I call it, and it can be named anything. It's just my names for them, right? So I call it the autonomous agent because this one is the one, at least I feel, is probably the most autonomous. Like in general, the autonomous enterprise is not fully looked at as being fully autonomous. A lot of people look at the word and go, "Oh man, like I don't want autonomous because then if there's autonomy in it, then there's no need for humans." But I'm saying it's kind of the opposite of that. And maybe it's because of my background being for process automation or enterprise automation. But in general, the reason why I think the autonomous agent could be is because this is the one that's like driving all of the things together. It's building the extract transform loads on where things are going, like where's the data. It's understanding the categories because it's getting all that ontology information. It's driving towards this concept called a chain of custody. And this is going to play a big part later when we start to build understandable AI and understandable answers from AI, so we don't get that classic question from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where it's like, what's the answer to life? And we get the answer 42 and we're like, but why? So we don't want that. So chain of custody is cool because it actually tells the relationship between the data. So again, like it's ontology, but towards the data. Where is it at? How is it? Where, who, what, where, and why? And then you have access controls, again, like higher level of RBAC of those role-based access controls, like as an organization, who has what? So when we hire on somebody new or somebody leaves, can we control that access? Do we have better access control? We probably do in this case. And then it goes into the taxonomy. So the thing we started talking about in the beginning when we talked about ontology and taxonomy, you can't really get to taxonomy fully until you understand that ontology. And again, this is why unstructured is hard. But when you have the ontology and you've built that up and you have it for the entire organization, you know really how things are moving and shaking. When you start to look at taxonomy, you say, well, hey, how do we classify these things at a very category level? How do we build associations between these data sets or these information or what have you? And then how do we optimize all that? Well, where are those optimizations? Where can they occur? Is between scheduling or, building out different ways. Do we even need to build even smarter ways of using general adversarial networks to test our own stuff, to test our own agents to see if we can do better? Like there's chances of that, but we can't get there, or we can't get to digital twins, which is another great topic, until we start to understand our information. And that's really what I'm talking to and trying to drive by explaining this thing to as many people as I can. Looking at the next big one and the last one in this is the expert agent. And this one is massively important because I believe that expert agents are going to be some of the first ones that we see as a species, as people in this like market and in this area of working with Gen AI, where you see the most wins, like the biggest wins. So when everybody's out there talking about low hanging fruit, expert agents say, no, what's the big hanging fruit? Like what's the thing that we can't touch that's high on the shelf that we can't reach, that we need to build a ladder to get to? Let's go do that. So expert agents literally are the embodiment of knowledge of a SME, like a subject matter expert or a domain expert. This is literally taking the tribal knowledge out of that person and saying, how do you do what you do because you're amazing, but you cost 300, 400K a year? How do we do that and like duplicate you essentially? Not taking your job because we still need that person involved. But what if that person was to leave? We'd be in a very tight spot. But if you could leverage that, then let's do it. So each enterprise agent has distinct roles, and those distinct roles are going to be based around the processes and like the personas that they're going to be implementing. We'll talk about that when the picture comes up here a little bit. So the spin up of AI agents. So since it's a multi-agent framework, it's not just a one shot. Like you have the ability to work with this. You have the ability to say, oh, I need some help here with your co-pilot. And then it's going to kick off to the AI agent and say, oh, hey, I can't answer this. So let's go, grab an expert agent to come build in some time and do this out and answer those questions for you. Strategic collaboration, again, sometimes it's hard to get a hold of the experts. When you're at a help desk level and you need to get to an expert, you have to go through many different layers. But what if you can cut that down? That would be key. So one of the other key factors and one of the chains that I talk about is like chain of thought, which we hear a lot about that recently with people trying to look at AI that could be talked to, AI that tells what's going on behind the scenes and not black box. And that chain of thought is, why did the AI choose this route? Why is it telling me what it's telling me? Because if it's not able to tell me these things, how am I supposed to learn as a human how it got there? So if we're going to be building AI that's smarter than us, how do we get smarter? And that's not a very human first approach if we're not doing that. But if we're taking that human first approach, we're saying, teach us, help us, let us learn from what it's doing, because eventually, if it's smarter, we want to learn from it. Continuous improvement, right? So how does it do what it's doing? How do we check it as humans to ensure that it's doing the right things and leveling that up? And then it goes into this aspect, right? So the last chain is the chain of reasoning. So we had the chain of thought, we have chain of reasoning, and we have chain of, no, I forgot. There's the chain of custody. And so the chain of custody, again, so in general, if we have an expert agent and it has internal behaviors, right, and then it has a personality, it's then running through a chain of thought, because I am an agent, I have this personality, I understand this process that I'm doing off of tribal knowledge. My chain of thought is that tribal knowledge, right? And then out of that, it's going to then go fetch some information, and that fetch of information could be within the multi-agent framework, which is then also anything it touches has a chain of custody. It's asking for a thing, it goes and touches a thing, it knows that it touched the thing, and then it comes back and says, hey, we gave you all this context, all of this data, it was from these sites, it can be sorted and cited. Now, provide out your chain of reasoning. And that chain of reasoning is, I have this context, I have reasoned these thoughts and these things, I'm going to then provide my perception on that, or my chain of thought on that. But the chain of reasoning gives you the ability to kind of go back to that SME that's still employed, still doing his stuff and her stuff, so that they have the resources to know where that's going, what it looks like, and they have that ability to have oversight of that. In which case it goes to like a virtual environment, or if you trust it, then great. Maybe it goes through like a change control cycle of virtual, and then it goes to production, what have you. But in all, when you start to trust these expert agents, they start to really become these virtual guardians, and they kind of guard your data from doing bad things, or they guard the fact like you have more of a gatekeeper. It's the same reason why when DevOps and some of this stuff came out, and these data lakes and whatnot, and the data lakes always turned into data swamps, because there was no real gatekeeper. The gatekeeper was a human that couldn't keep up with it usually. But if you have something like this in play, you can then actually gatekeep much better. And if you have your sources of truth and you have it producing those chain of thoughts, chain of reasoning, chain of custody, you're going to have thoughtful AI. You're going to have AI that will help humans and take a human first approach and say, here's why I did what I did. Here's what I got to understand. I reasoned it and I gave you my thought, and here it is. And that is expert agents. And I believe that, and there's a few of them out there now, that are a few companies that are doing this, and some of the stuff that they're touching is huge.
This slide's fascinating to me, because it feels to me like we need to begin to capture data differently than we're currently capturing it, or being able to analyze data differently, or being able to classify the capture differently. So, for instance, and with the subject matter expert, like you mentioned, I think every organization can sympathize with the idea that person becomes inordinately influential, and if they were to leave a large part of the organization, the knowledge base leaves with them. But a lot of what their knowledge, a lot of how their knowledge is transferred, isn't necessarily in classic data elements like the written word. It's spoken. It's demonstrated. Right, and not necessarily recorded or transcribed or captured in the way that it would need to be in order to be properly leveraged in this expert agent framework.
Yeah, it could be tied up in meetings and stuff like that too. So if those are transcribed, I mean, that's a lot of the future we see right now is meeting transcriptions and information coming out of that. And so that's very key as well.
Yeah, and I mean, and just the expectation that all calls are going to be recorded and all emails are going to be ingested and into a
some kind of
language
filter,
model.
some kind of agent. Yeah.
And which I don't know that everybody. I wonder if organizations are prepared to make that cultural shift where it's like, look, everything you do, every word, every syllable, every keystroke, everything you do in this organization is going to be ported into a larger language model that's proprietary to our organization.
I mean, there's definitely going to be a culture shock depending on what side of the world you're on, right? Europe has always been very more digitally accepting or digitally savvy because they're more like, hey, let's try it, versus an agent that is watching everything that you do and everything that you type and understanding your ontology.
And every word you say on every call you're on.
Yeah, I think United States folks would be like, I don't know about that. So
Right.
I think really it's going to require leadership.
I think it's going to require like a very specific employment agreements that
probably that too.
Say some very specific things about everything, every utterance, particularly for somebody who has tribal knowledge or is creating tribal knowledge for an organization as a subject matter expert.
But I mean, to your point, like how do you capture that, right? And we need to start capturing it differently. We've and historically tried to capture things differently. There was business process management that came out that people said, let's start capturing and writing down our processes and keeping track of that. People didn't do it. And then you have BAs, like business analysts, that came in and say, hey, the PMO, the project management office, is saying, this is how we do projects and this is how we track this stuff. Well, that didn't always work out. Or you have Lean Six Sigma, which is fantastic, but really dives into the process, but then it kind of peters out sometimes, sadly. So, or like ITIL and all these things, like we have the data, we have the know-how sometimes, but it does get lost over generation, and people tend to not to do it. I don't know how many people I've talked to that don't do Agile just because they don't like it anymore. And so they don't take an iterative approach to what they do.
Yeah, let's take a break and come back with a few final thoughts on what you presented and also maybe on how this starts to play out.
Want more Insight Jam? Follow us on Instagram for exclusive content like a daily dose of best practices and buying advice from industry experts and leading solution providers. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel for long-form highlights from our expert panel discussions. The Solutions Review team is hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so don't miss out.
All right, Doug, I know there's a whole lot more that you can show, and actually I would suggest that we might dig in on a few more of the slides, because I know you're bringing it out and around. You presented it in Prague. You're bringing it to Houston. And I know in our conversations, you have a very human approach to this, and I think it's very considerate and mindful of the moment. I'm curious. Tell us a little bit more about why you're thinking of things in that framework.
Yeah, I mean, I've always like kind of followed the stance of to be clear is to be kind, but also seeing through the lens, again, as a practitioner in automation and working with, employees and making their lives easier without getting rid of them. Like, every place I've ever worked and everything I've ever driven in this space, no one left because they got automated. And there's a key reason in that is because, like, you never want to get rid of, like, I think it's like the rules of like creating a movement, creating a change is don't get rid of your first follower, embrace that first follower, because that first follower is going to help lead everyone else. And you want to drive that. And that's a very human aspect, right? So you have to take, people say, automation in general and everything is like, it's a human first thing, or they don't want to say human first, but they say people are the reason. Like, it's people focused and to drive that. I've always said it's like, it is people, but it's people understanding the culture where they're coming from, and not from a personal culture, more of a business culture, because businesses have their own culture as well. And so I think between that and the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is I've been lucky enough to go to these different events, to be asked on different podcasts, to get perspective, to be a part of different organizations, and really hear where there are troubles or hear where there are issues and look to address those. But also, I mean, I have kids of my own, and really the future of where they're going matters to me. And I think everyone else's kids, for that example, like, we see where the world's going and can we make a difference? And I think we can. And so if you're in a position where you think you can, like, start talking about it. And I think that's where we all start from.
Well, I think it's going to be fascinating. There's an inevitable collision between thoughtful implementation with an intent of humanity versus better, cheaper, faster, right? Which is always the driver when the sales people start showing up, and they will. And that's my fear, is that I God only knows how much it is. It's got to be over 200 billion, maybe more, that's been invested. I think we had a presentation with Informatica here, where we did a solution spotlight with Informatica. And one of the slides said there were 17,200 AI startups. And that was last week. It might be more than that now.
Next week.
But with that much investment and that many startups and that much pressure to deliver, and that many salespeople funded to go out and sell, the pitch that's coming will be the tried and true 3 moving parts: better, cheaper, faster. It'll be all of that. And that is not necessarily a human-centric story. And it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
It will. And I do believe, and the reason why I wrote up the multi-agent framework and where I believe the autonomous enterprise is going, is because if enterprises are literally the hardest hit with this. They have legacy work, they have legacy technology, they're trying to keep up with the Joneses, and classic saying there. But if they become enabled and they build out the autonomous enterprise, or they work with a vendor or someone that's driving this forward, especially around like Gen 3, intelligent automation, what you have is you have enterprises that can actually keep their own information. You have enterprises that aren't going to go do the Toys R Us thing where they say, we need someone to ship our toys because it makes it easier for us, helps our bottom line. Okay, Amazon will do that for you. Then you say, every year we have a Christmas calendar that has all the toys that we offer all the kids and stuff, and we have all these abilities. Amazon will do that too. Oh wait, then Amazon takes over your entire business. But what if you were able to in-house that because you were able to mitigate those issues, drive solutions around that, and really build out the wins? And if you can, don't you just get better and better? Don't you become the experts of your own industry, of your own area, because you're consistently looking outside the box. You're innovating, you're driving that forward, and you're pivoting where you need to. Do you do the thing that Sony did? Do you go, hey, we do entertainment, we do Sony PlayStation, we do movies. Maybe we go help the elderly now. Maybe we build the future of that because there is a need there. Why don't we do that?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that that every organization is going to need to develop a strategy here, and it will be an existential moment for a lot of companies, where it's like, what is our strategy? How do we stay relevant? How do we maintain our position in? And if you're not iterating like Toys R Us or Sears or some Blockbuster, then you're not going to survive this moment. So I think what we're going to see is the range of human frailty. You're going to see some really thoughtful and elegant pivoting and implementations, and you're going to see other just kind of
the other side of Grok 2 and the images as it's delivering, and going, wow, maybe we do need some constraints.
Yeah, no, it's right. Grok, I think, is going to really, but it's kind of nice to see the full spectrum, right? I don't think we want everything completely controlled, but I think we also see that when it's not completely controlled, that there needs to be some control. I think we all like to figure out where that is for our own self, and I think again that will be probably how it plays out in the enterprise as well, is that some companies will be comfortable with a little more aggressive approach and others will be comfortable with something a little more thoughtful.
Yeah, but if you always deal with small waves, you're never going to build a wall to protect you from the big waves. But if you get a giant wave, you're going to have a conversation about flooding and tsunamis. So,
well, and the good news is that we're right at the beginning, and we're going to get to have this conversation over and over and over again. And every time we get back together, it seems as if there is some other amazing release or news or revelation, and it feels still to me like we're barely a toddler in all this, and
I mean, there's
the
stuff we
good
didn't
stuff
talk
hasn't
about.
even started yet.
Yeah, there's one thing that was amazing about like the red teaming of OpenAI, and it literally copied the person's voice. And at first I thought this was like a joke. I was like, no, it didn't do that. But they actually released it and said it did do that.
Well, and it screamed out prior to that. It screamed out no, as if it was in pain.
Yeah,
and
then it went in that person's same voice, but you couldn't tell. You're like, oh, maybe it just misheard. No, like
no. If you hear the record, I heard the recording too, and it's a little off-putting because it feels to me like, and I've seen that in more than one instance where AI is exhibiting emotional behavior.
Yeah, human-esque, or I mean, at this point, like, are we anthropomorphizing it, or is it doing it on purpose? Because there was another example of, like I said, count to 50, and it took breaths, and I was like, oh man, like, stop taking breaths, just go 1 to 50, go.
There's all kinds of examples. There's an example of an artwork that does it's constantly cleaning up a spill on a table, and the table's being and the spill is constantly, but it's constantly having to deal with the spill.
Right.
And over time, the table becomes almost frustrated that it can't finish the task, and it begins to perform differently than it was when it was first enthusiastically implemented. And
That's
again,
model drift, probably. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Anyway, well, again, always a pleasure. Plenty to talk about. I know you are going to have some fine travels out there. You're going to get to see a lot of folks. Yep. And we will catch up with you in a couple of weeks and see what you've been up to, and maybe even see a little bit more of that presentation.
Sounds good. Yep. Thanks, Doug.